Hi friends, where is the best place to drop on the new map E-District in Apex Legends Season 22? I've built a brand new loot map to show you the best loot zones and also what the loot tier is of each point of interest, and I'll talk you through what that means in terms of the best place to drop and also where to find better loot. Before I get into it though, could I kindly ask you to hit the like and subscribe buttons? It really does help me out, so thank you. And now let's look at the loot maps I've built, and I've actually got two versions that I've created for you, because E-District works a little bit different to what we have in the other maps in Apex Legends. So take a look at this loot map to start with. There are 17 points of interest on E-District, and size-wise, they say it's similar to World's Edge. You can see the high tier loot zones in purple, mid tier in blue, and basic tier in grey. Although when I say you can see, you'll actually notice on E-District, every zone is purple, meaning every zone is classed as high tier. And by this, I mean if you run around the whole map, which is exactly what I've done multiple times to assess the loot tiers of each zone, you'll notice in the top left of your screen, it essentially classes all of those 17 POIs as purple high tier loot zones. And that's where this first map comes in. The issue with E-District is that it doesn't mean there is more loot or better loot in the whole POI like it does on some maps. And part of this is because we have larger POIs with more spread out loot on E-District, and that means we need this second map that I've created. In this version you can still see the purple circles, but instead of that indicating the whole area being high loot, I've actually tried to pick out where the loot is more focused and therefore where it tends to be higher and better within each POI. And that's definitely something you might have noticed on E-District. As you move towards the edges of each of the POIs, the loot tends to change. It often gets a lot thinner and the quality tends to be not quite as good. And that kind of means you want to think more about these central areas and those more central buildings, not just to get more loot, but to get better quality loot. And that's what I've tried to indicate with these little purple circles. Now, part of the reason why you're struggling to find good loot throughout the POI is that in Season 22, they've reduced the spawn rate of gold and purple attachments by 50%. And what that means is it's essentially harder to find better loot, even if you're in a high tier loot zone like they call each of these POIs. So actually that part's not necessarily to do with the map, it's actually just a change they made in Season 22, which I think a good bunch of people just didn't notice were in the patch notes. But also because the POIs are slightly larger and just the way the map is split up and segregated, but also built up in terms of the type of buildings, that means the nerf to the loot as well as the variability of the loot is exactly why you need these loot maps. It's also worth noting that E-District doesn't have a lot of unnamed or linkage type POIs that we've got on a lot of the other maps. If I flash up Broken Moon for example, you can see a few linkage type areas here like Hazmat Tunnel, Riverfront, Windy Hill, and so on. These are places that don't have much loot, and generally the loot there isn't high tier. If I show you Storm Point, you can also see a lot more on Storm Point, these kind of grey linkage type areas that aren't really full POIs in themselves. If we go back to E-District though, you don't really have those linkage type of POIs. Instead, they just classify these as part of the overall POI. And that's another reason why loot can be a little bit strange in E-District, especially as you're getting in between areas and towards the outside of those larger POIs. So when you put this together, what does it mean in terms of the best places to drop on E-District in Apex Legends? Well, the general rule with this is to stop dropping on the outsides of those POIs, because if you compare it to Storm Point or Broken Moon again, it's almost like you're dropping in those no-names which don't have much loot. Therefore, you want to focus, especially on the larger POIs, on dropping more centrally. Think about again where I've marked these purple circles. Now you don't have to drop inside the purple circle, but definitely think about where the buildings are around these purple circles, where is the loot highly concentrated, that's where you're going to find better quality loot and also more loot in general. So in terms of hot drops, it's still early, but for sure Energy Bank looks like the #1 hotspot on this map. 9 times out of 10, you'll get at least 2 or more squads landing there, and in the rare scenario no one else actually lands there, you can almost guarantee teams will at least rotate through there, and that's simply because it's so big and takes up pretty much the center of the whole map, so it's kind of hard to rotate from one end of the map to the other without going through that area. And you can see an example of that in this game I had here where I scanned. You can see just how many teams are concentrated in the Energy Bank area. Of course, that's more of a pub strategy. If you're trying to hunt kills or just get loads of kills, then Energy Bank's going to be one of those good hotspots. Obviously, it's not that great of a strategy if you're playing more conservatively and you're trying to focus on placement points in ranked, but we'll talk about some good drop spots for that strategy in just a moment. Finishing with the hot drops though, the secondary hot drop seems to be City Hall. Like Energy Bank, it's one of the larger areas, although not quite as big as Energy Bank. The thing about City Hall though, is it does have some quite distinctive buildings, which mean you do have loot in some largely concentrated areas. For example, if you think about Neon Square, you've got so many buildings there with the loot spread out across it. Same goes for other areas that are quite big like Electro Dam and the Resort. Although I should say it does kind of depend on the dropship. If you find the dropship steering away from City Hall, for example on the other side of the map, then you might find City Hall becomes a little quieter. Now for ranked, I mentioned you might want a quieter spot to land in. For now, most of the outer areas of the map seem fairly quiet, which is kind of the opposite of a lot of the other maps, where actually you find a few good hotspots on the outside of the map. Here though, if you want a more conservative place to drop, perhaps a place where you can focus on placement points, then a few good places are Old Town, Heights, Blossom Drive and Viaduct. These ones tend to be a little less busy, although I should say there is a bit of a dependency on the dropship here. Most of the time you won't find the dropship starts at Heights or Blossom Drive, making them pretty good places, and therefore if you're playing this strategy of being a bit more conservative, just keep a lookout for where the dropship's starting and where it's ending. Apart from that though, hopefully this gives you a bit of a better idea on where you can drop and rotate through on the E District map. Remember, try and focus on where you land, not just in terms of which POI you choose, but I feel like on E District, you've really got to consider also where you're dropping within those POIs. Certainly a lot more than you do on some of the other POIs on some of the other maps. Hopefully this helps. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you later.